Good morning, everybody. My name is Trevor Shell, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second of 4 weekly webinars of our 26th annual webinar series, which is focused on the recognition and prevention of musculoskeletal disorders. OHCOW's RSI Day webinar series has become the largest in the world for webinars focused on ergonomics. This year, we're only halfway through our weekly event, and we've already surpassed last year's target number of registrations. To date, as you can see on the map, we have registrants from across 61 countries, surpassing last year's total by 7. And of course, we just want to wish everyone a very happy Valentine's Day. Now, there will be a series of questions appearing on your screen, so please take the time to respond to them, as they are very important to us to justify holding such a webinar series. The chat is also being monitored, so please take the time to ask your questions to the presenters there. Also, we ask that you please remain unmuted or muted for the series to make sure that we don't have to eject you from the session. And today's session is entitled Reality Check 2025, Hazard Mitigation. We have 2 sessions today. The first will be on heat stress management, a new toolkit for Ontario workplaces, and presented by one of our hygienists, André Gauvin. And the second session will look at ergonomics and manual materials handling, 2 sessions that have been very widely asked of our presenters in the past. So we hope that you enjoy, and just give us a few moments where we switch over to André, who's going to be our first presenter.
All right. Thanks, Trevor. Can everybody see my screen?
We can, André.
All right. Just going to make sure I can see everything here. Okay, well, thanks, Trevor. Again, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is André Gauvin. I'm an occupational hygienist with the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario workers. I'm based out of Sudbury, Ontario. So it's actually a very cold day today here. We're hitting some -20s here in Sudbury. So talking about heat stress, we're going to switch gears here, going the other way. So talk about our current situation first. So, we've had a proposed regulation from the Ministry of Labor. We're still waiting on that. It seems like their position's currently on hold with the election scheduled at the end of February. So once that's done, it might be tabled again. I know it was mentioned that uh, they think that the regulations we have in place may be sufficient, and with the new toolkit that we have, if they follow that, it should be fine. Um, yes, that may be true. However, regulations often put a little more pressure on employers to do the right thing. So we're still kind of pushing for regulation, but we'll see what happens there. There's obviously new challenges with climate change. Just bringing awareness to everybody. Wildfire smokes. There's a ton of wildfires going on every summer, and there's also temporary foreign workers who are exposed at uh, not only outdoors but even in their bunkhouses. So we did a study on that to see what's been happening, and some of these workers are actually exposed. They're more exposed to heat stress when they're off of work than they are at work. So there's those issues as well. We have about 15 to 20 years experience with the OHCOW tool, which is just a Humidex plan. So we built those about 20 years ago, and they've been in place where people have been using them for at least 15 years now. Um, and then we had an opportunity with the MOL to have some funding to update the tools. So that's kind of what we did. So based on the evaluations that we've had from other HSAs and unions, employers who have used the tools, we've been able to make some changes to go along with that. So the Ontario Climate Change Report. So when you look at this report here, it says that we have an average of about 9 days above 30 degrees Celsius every year. Well, just looking at three of our major cities in Ontario. So you look at Toronto, Ottawa, and Windsor. In the last 3 years or 3 summers, we've had more than 9 days. So Windsor, you had 25 in 2022, 11 in 2023, and 2024 was a pretty hot summer in Windsor with 26 days above 30 degrees Celsius. And then Toronto, it's on a decline. And Ottawa is pretty consistent. That's 16 to 14 days. So this is the old heat stress awareness guide. So we updated it to the heat stress toolkit. And when you're looking at the awareness guide, it kind of turned into the prevention tools and strategies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But we do have three guides. So we have the awareness guide, which is kind of like an encyclopedia about heat stress, kind of gives you everything about it. And we're going to go through a little bit of that today. The heat stress prevention tools and strategies. And then we have the physiological monitoring guide as well. And we have some links for the toolkit. They're going to be in the chat. Trevor's going to do that for us. If you feel free to click on those and check them out. There's also a bunch of infographics that you can take a look at, and posters and things that you can just post on your bulletin board to give awareness to your workers. So when we're looking at this, at creating this toolkit, we were kind of thinking on who we're trying to reach and what we want them to know or to do, not just know. So the audience was really, heat stress exposed workers is a big one. Health and safety reps, supervisors, even heat stress program managers and professionals and senior management. You kind of want everyone to be involved in the program. And since the project was originally funded by unions and the prevention partners, which used to be the OHCOW, we thought it was important to try and re-engage everyone. So we had the Ontario Health and Safety System partners involved, the Ministry of Labor, unions, and the OFL as well, help us develop the toolkit. So in the winter months, obviously, our body is trying to conserve heat, but over the hotter months, your body's thermostat needs to change from heating to cooling. So what's that called? It's called thermoregulation. So despite variations in temperature, humans can maintain a constant body temperature by balancing heat gain with heat loss. So we as humans can tolerate a decline in core temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius on a decline, but only an increase of about 5 degrees Celsius before your system starts to shut down. So what happens when your body starts to heat up? So on a regular day, this is kind of what your arteries and capillaries look like. Um, and this is kind of what your body profile would look like. But this is kind of on a regular day inside here, obviously not in the cold. In the cold, you would constrict even more to try and keep your core temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. So when it starts to heat up, or you start to exercise even, all of your arteries start to get bigger. This is called vasodilation. So most of your capillaries, and it pushes the heat towards the extremities so that you can dissipate that heat. And then your body profile would look something like the one on the left here, where you have 37 degrees pushing out at all extremities to try and dissipate that heat. And this is kind of the process of thermoregulation to cool your body. So how do we feel when you're exposed to heat? So what kind of symptoms do you experience? Typically, you'd start with some general fatigue, so transient heat fatigue it's called. Some sluggish, you'll feel sluggish when you're working, just tiredness. And a lot of times all you need is a little bit of fluid replacement and rest, and you'll be okay. And a little bit of time away from the heat. And then you also have heat rashes. So heat rashes is an irritation of the skin caused by excessive heat and sweating. It really develops because of plugged sweat glands. So a lot of times it happens when you're working in a dirtier environment. So your sweat glands will get clogged and it kind of looks like little pimples on your skin. And then you'll have some redness and it'll be itchy and it'll be a bumpy rash that's pretty itchy. One of the things you can do to mitigate this is, or not to mitigate, but to avoid this is just, if you do feel that you're working in the dirt and stuff, it just kind of putting some cool water on your skin to kind of rinse it off. Typically, it'll take the rash away. Heat syncope, so this is basically fainting. And it's usually the first signs of heat stress, typically in the earlier season of heat stress. So before your circulation system has adapted to the heat. So a lot of times this will happen, after, like if you're working in the heat and you sat down to have your lunch or something like that, and now most of your blood is going to your stomach to try and digest your food, and then you get up and you start working right away in the hot sun, you might have some fainting symptoms or dizziness, nausea, things like that, and you'll feel faint. And some people, they pass out right away and then they're up in 2-3 seconds. It's just that lack of blood flow going to your brain because your body is not acclimatized to that at the moment. So it's usually in the earlier parts of the season. If that does happen, you want to place the victim in a cool location, a prone position. If they're conscious, you give them fluids, and it's the same treatment as if you've been in shock, kind of thing. You can also have some heat cramps, so that's cramping of the legs, arms, usually the muscles that are being used. And that's usually because you don't have enough electrolytes in your body. So as you're sweating, especially in the earlier season again, you're not acclimatized, your body's not used to that. So you're sweating a lot of the electrolytes out. As you work in this environment more and more, your body seems to be more efficient and it keeps the electrolytes in while sweating more water. So, drinking electrolyte replacing fluids like Gatorade, quenchers, Powerade, things like that will help replenish your electrolytes. So heat exhaustion would be the next symptom, right? A little more serious. You're getting into nausea, dizziness, weakness, headache, blurred vision, profuse sweating, cold, wet, clammy skin, unconsciousness, coma, or death. Usually unconsciousness, coma, or death is more in the heat stroke stage, but we put it here in heat exhaustion because it can switch from heat exhaustion to heat stroke very quickly. So it's important to recognize these symptoms. So again, the first aid for this, if you do have a worker or something that's going through heat exhaustion, is to find a cool location and rest there. Place them in a prone position if they're unconscious, give them fluids if they're conscious, and seek medical help immediately. And transport them to the medical room. If they might need, IV treatment to replenish their fluids and electrolytes. So which organ in the body is most susceptible to heat? Typically, I would ask this in person, but since we're on a webinar, I'll just put it out there. So that's the brain. You want to protect the brain at all costs, right? That's how you function. So you have your hypothalamus. This is basically your heat loss center. And this is what controls your heat loss mechanisms. But if they get too hot, basically your hypothalamus doesn't know what to do. Your brain doesn't know what to do anymore. So it just starts to go crazy and it just says, okay, well, I'm shutting everything down. So the brain functions best at a temperature of about 37 degrees. And heat stress programs are designed to keep the body temperature below 38 degrees Celsius. And the reason for that is because at 40 degrees Celsius, the brain gives up on trying to cool the body. So your hypothalamus just says, well, I don't know what to do anymore. This is way too hot. I'm trying to tell you to cool down, but you're not doing it, or your body's giving you signs and symptoms to cool down, and it's not happening. You're not kind of following what I'm trying to tell you, so it just shuts down. And this is where you get into heat stroke. So you might have chills, restlessness, irritability, euphoria. I don't know if anybody has ever seen someone under heat stroke, but they're disoriented. They're kind of lost. They don't really know where they are. They have hot, dry skin, so they're not really sweating anymore. They can collapse, become unconscious, have convulsions, and even death. So immediate aggressive cooling is important in these cases, and using wet cloths, immersion into cold water, anything that'll be cooler than their skin is important. Just put that on them to try and cool them as quickly as possible, and transporting them to emergency medical facilities as soon as possible to try and get these people recovered. So it's important to watch out for each other. So a worker heading into heat stroke, they won't be able to realize what's happening anymore. Most of them are lost. Like I said, they're disoriented. They have no clue what's going on by that point. So you really got to watch out for them. And that's where the buddy system comes in. It's really important to have coworkers being able to recognize what's happening and intervene, and always working together in the heat. So without quick attention, a coworker may actually die from heat stroke. So there's also other health effects. So we have chronic long-term health effects. So chronic exposure to heat can result in long-term illness affecting the brain, heart, kidney, livers, and muscles. Especially if you've had a pre-existing condition. It can also affect both male and female reproductive systems, making it harder to conceive. With chronic heat stress can disturb your sleep patterns and affect mental health. I don't know if any of you have this, if you don't have air conditioning in your house, and you go to sleep in the summer months and you just can't sleep because it's really warm out. I used to have that when I was a kid. We didn't have air conditioning. We do now, thankfully, but definitely used to disturb my sleep. We've also found a study that with consecutive days of heat stress can lead to cumulative impact on the body. So without enough recovery time away from the heat, the strain can actually accumulate instead of actually allowing the body to adapt or acclimate to the heat. There's a buildup of strain that may result in causing more harm. And this is particularly in older adults, 55 plus is what the significance was in the study. So who's more susceptible to heat stress with all this, right? So which of your coworkers are you worried about most? So there are some predisposing factors. The risk factors are, very small body size. People who are overweight, over the age of 40, and really over the age of 55 is even more sensitive. Previous heat illness, if you've had a previous heat illness, you're more susceptible to another heat illness. Heart disease, so obviously with your circulation being affected with heart disease, you might have a harder time with heat loss. High blood pressure, diabetes, inactivity, so people are inactive, again, people who are physically active, So sooner or later, really, we're all at risk. So nobody can get away from heat stress. It's important to, make sure that we know the signs and symptoms and that we're watching out for everyone. So with all the vulnerabilities, who are the ones who typically get heat stroke? Well, typically it's the young physical males, and then the elderly sick. And the reason it's the young physically fit males is because they seem to be the ones that feel like they're invincible. So they push, right? Especially the ones who are athletes, they're trained to kind of push through pain and to push through the signs and symptoms that you might be having. So in the workplace, you really got to watch for these people because sometimes they just don't stop. And if you look at these two here, these two athletes actually died from heat stroke. They're both professional athletes. They're training in the heat, and next thing you know, they died of heat stroke. And I just seen in the chat there, soldiers as well, and that's a good point. Soldiers are also trained to push through the limits, so you got to watch out for each other. So there's also indirect health effects, or indirect costs to heat stress. So you have reduced work performance, right? You're tired, fatigued workers, so they have a reduced accuracy and efficiency when they're trying to perform their work. You might have more accidents at work because they're tired and fatigued. They're more susceptible to accidents and injury. Reproductive problems, we talked about that. It can happen to both male and females. It can also affect the fetus. So it's another thing. If you do have a pregnant woman in the workplace and she's working in the heat, it's something to watch out for. Probably best to not have her work in the heat. If you've had previous heart, lung disease, or kidney or circulatory problems, heat stress and added strain on your body, and it can precipitate to more serious and acute problems. And then poor morale. So anybody working under heat stress conditions are usually not happy. So it can aggravate a pre-existing morale, a labor relations problem as well. So heat loss. So how does your body lose heat? Right. So there's 4 processes that contribute to heat loss. You have radiation, which is, you have all the heat going to your extremities to radiate the heat. This usually works together with convection. So as it radiates the heat, you have, some cool wind or something blowing by you, and it kind of just cools you off. And then you have conduction, which is, process of touching something colder, which will cool your body down in turn. And then evaporation. So evaporation is important. Also, evaporation is sweat. As you sweat, the wind goes by, it'll evaporate it, and it cools your body down. So under exercise and heavy workload, evaporation is almost the only thing that is cooling you down. It's about 80% of your heat loss mechanisms is evaporation of sweat. So it's really important to stay hydrated. So what are the signs of hydration? So inadequate hydration, you'll see that you're urinating less often. You have excessive weight loss. You might have a strong odor to your urine, and the urine color is going to be pretty dark. And then if you are adequately hydrated, you'll have frequent urination. Your urine color will be light. It's not going to be clear completely. It'll be more like a light beer, and it'll be odorless. So what to drink if you're hydrated or if you're dehydrated? So electrolyte drinks are good, but they're not usually needed for a typical North American diet unless you're getting some heat cramps and it's early on in the season. So Gatorade is good. I would stay away from Prime because there's a massive amount of electrolytes in there. And there's also caffeine in them, and you want to stay away from that. Prime is, there's enough electrolytes in one of those to create imbalances in your body to cause other issues. So again, I'd stay away from that, especially if you have a salty diet already. Again, stay away from caffeinated, carbonated drinks. These and diet drinks and alcohol, these actually take water out of your body rather than keeping them in. So water is best, or juices, just to give you that glucose. And non-caffeinated sports drinks are also good. So yeah, juices will contain a little bit of that energy to restore your glucose and give your body, your cells what it needs to be efficient. So how much should you be drinking? So it's about a cup every 20 minutes, even if you're not thirsty. So as soon as you are thirsty, it's usually too late. It usually means that you're dehydrated a little bit. Um, so again, every 20 minutes, a cup or a full bottle every half hour to an hour max. So a 500 milliliter bottle of water every half hour is pretty good. So what factors can we measure for heat stress? So what are we measuring when we measure for heat stress? Well, we have the Humidex plan, so temperature and relative humidity, which we're going to go through. The ACGIH TLV, which they look at the wet bulb globe temperature or the effective wet bulb globe temperature. And then you also have physiological monitoring. So that's, heart rate, skin temperature, core temperature. And this is usually involving a more complex heat stress program. You don't typically see this in a regular workplace. You might see it in, greenhouses or in underground workplaces where there's extreme heat, or even, where they're working in furnaces and things like that, where there is extreme heat and they can't, take the necessary breaks that they need because they have to be there. So then you would have physiological monitoring to see, okay, well, let's monitor them until the point where we have to take them away to give them that break, right? So the ACGIH heat strain or heat stress and strain TLV, this is basically the gold standard. So everything that we've done in this toolkit is based off of this. And the reason that we use it is because it's evidence-based, right? The ACGIH has been around for a long time. They have detailed literature summaries and an explanation of how the TLV works and instruction on how to properly apply it. It's considered minimal professional practice standards, and it's been used since 1974 and constantly updated. So we've had the last update for the heat stress TLV was in 2022, and that's what we based everything off of. So because the WBG or the ACGIH uses the WBGT, well, we need to know what it is, right? So the wet bulb globe thermometer, you have, or wet bulb globe temperature, you have three different thermometers here. So you have the normal thermometer or the dry bulb, which is that one there. Then you have the wet bulb thermometer, which measures humidity. And you have your globe temperature, which measures radiant heat. And that makes up the wet bulb globe temperature. So there are two different formulas. You have one for indoor or shaded environments, and then you have one for direct sunlight exposure, which includes the globe temperature or the dry bulb, sorry. And then you would apply that measure to this screening criteria for the effective WBGT. The difference between the 2022 and the older TLV is that they actually stated it's for acclimatized and unacclimatized workers, where the old one didn't really state what it was for. There was just an action limit and then a TLV. So it's a little bit more, or a little bit easier to follow in that sense. But yeah, you would take the measurement and then you would apply it here. But again, you have to remember that it's a time-weighted average, so you need to take multiple measures. So now we'll get into, so we kind of went through the heat stress awareness guide there a little bit of information. There's a lot more detail in the guide itself, so I'd encourage you to read that. But now we're getting into the prevention tools and strategies. So what we did with this guide is that we kind of split up the heat stress management program into 4 different levels, right? Something that's more simpler and more frequent, going to a more complex and less frequently used. So you have supported self-management. Let's go through it here. Supported self-management, which is knowledgeable workers who have demonstrated that they're able to recognize early signs and symptoms and supported by their supervisors and are provided the latitude to manage their work rate and their fluid intake. So this level of heat stress management cannot be followed without proper heat stress awareness and prevention training. So again, you need to be trained to follow the supported self-management. That's basically when people listen to their body and they're able to, you know, manage heat stress on their own. This is the ideal situation. You would then have the Humidex plan or the WBGT estimate-based heat response plan. So the Humidex-based heat response plan is a simplified version of the ACGIH TLV, and it's based on direct measurements of temperature and relative humidity. And the measurements are converted to Humidex or WBGT, then prescribing preventative action. So this is designed for workplaces without process heat or humidity sources and regular work clothing, and usually a moderate workload as well. Then you have the screening TLV, which is basically following the ACGIH directly. So using the official screening WBGT measurement, so you would need the proper equipment. So you would need a wet bulb globe thermometer for this. It's for a bit more complex and unusual exposures. There's also the option to do the TLV analysis method, which is a little more complex as well. But definitely look at the TLV documentation to follow this. And you would need a WBGT meter to do these methods. And then finally, we have the TLV for physiological monitoring. This is really for complex cases, and you'd have to follow the ACGIH criteria. It can also be used for self-monitoring, so using smartwatches or other apps can be useful, but they are an unofficial approach, and you got to caution with their accuracy and validity. So we'll go through a little bit of everything here. So supported self-management, really there's training elements that you would need to have. So you'd have to have the So exposed worker training elements. So this is kind of the elements that you're looking for a training program. You want to make sure that it's in a language and a learning pattern that's adapted to the workers and that they'll understand and it's clear. They need to know what the signs and symptoms of heat stress is. And it's good to have them kind of relate their own experiences to heat stress, right? Most people have been exposed to heat stress in some way or form in their lifetime. They may not even know it. So by telling them what it is and what kind of experiences they may have had from working in the heat, it kind of makes them recognize what's going on. And then you have to show them what to do in cases of signs and symptoms. So whether it's first aid responses, just listen to your body, how much to drink, when to take a break, and when to drink, right? And the logistics behind it. So again, are they getting enough fluid supply? Do they know where this fluid supply is? Is it supplied by their employer? Do they have to bring it themselves? Those are all questions to ask. How do they monitor hydration? Do they know how? Just using a urine chart is a good thing. Do they wait for the thirst sensation or do they drink beforehand? Are they having muscle cramps? How much fluid are they supposed to take? When should they drink electrolytes? They need to know that alcohol and caffeine actually dehydrates the body. So taking notes of all of this, and also knowing that if you're dripping in sweat, you got to know how to respond to that. Usually when you're dripping in sweat, you're definitely going under heat stress. And this is the time, okay, well, let's take a break, let's drink some water and a little bit of rest, and then keep going after that. Watching out for coworkers, so having a buddy system is another thing, and having supervisors looking out for their teammates. What's the role of supervisor? Reviewing your SOP if there is one. Looking at videos, posters, info cards if you have them available. We do have an SOP as part of the heat stress toolkit that you can just take. Everything is in there that you can follow. You can change it if you want to, but if you don't have one and you need one, we have a standard of practice ready to go for anyone who needs one. Demonstration of training. This is an important thing. So after your training is done, it's important to go ask the workers while they're on site to see, just ask them a question. What would you do if your worker collapsed here? What would you do if, you know, um, if you're just feeling tired or feeling stress, like you're feeling that heat stress, what would you do? Right? They should be able to answer those questions pretty easily. And you ask them while they're working in the environment. And then they need to know their health and safety rights and the internal procedures to exercise those rights. And the critical role of supervisors. So the supervisor needs to know the heat stress management plan as well. It's not only for employers or employees. The supervisor needs to know because they're the direct line of communication most of the time, and often they're the ones watching over their employees. So they need to know what to do in these cases as well. So these are experts from the general controls directly from ACGIH. So the first thing is, training, providing verbal and written instruction for pre-job and annual training programs with information about heat stress and strain, heat disorders, mitigation plan, and emergency response plan in a language format that is understood by workers and supervisors. So if you look at Table 5 of the ACGIH, there are the elements of the heat stress management program. And this is from our calculator. So we evaluate your heat stress training program right in the calculator, and we'll go through that at the end of this presentation. But we'll evaluate your outcomes and delivery as inadequate, minimal, sufficient, or excellent going through it. So just to be minimal, you have to tick off these 6 training outcomes to be in a minimal stage. So, can you explain what heat rash is and how to treat it? Do you know the symptoms of heat syncope? Are you aware of the cause of muscle cramps and know what to drink to counter the symptoms? Can you recognize the symptoms of heat exhaustion? Understand the dangers of heat stroke and need to watch for others? And understand that heat stroke is a life or death medical emergency. If you know those 6 and you could check them off, then you have a minimal heat stress management program or training, I should say. But obviously, you would try and get to excellent if you can. So again, if you're looking at the supportive self-management, low-tech tools is something like this, like hydration urine charts, where it tells you that you're good or you're dehydrated or very dehydrated. And then there's other infographics that we have that you can just post on your bulletin boards or in washrooms and things like that to remind people of the signs and symptoms of heat stress. So the Humidex base heat response plan. So you'll notice that we removed Humidex 2 in the response plan. In the old plan, it had a Humidex 2, which was for acclimatized workers. The reason we removed Humidex 2 is because most employers were only using that as their measure, even though their workers were not acclimatized. So there is an acclimatization argument here. Acclimatization requires physical activity under heat stress like those anticipated for the work for at least 2 hours for 5 of the last 7 days for a worker to be acclimatized for the purpose of TLV. And acclimatization declines when activity under heat stress conditions are discontinued, and a noticeable loss occurs after 4 days and may be completely lost in 3 weeks. So a person may not be fully acclimatized to sudden or episodic higher level of heat stress. So this means that you may be exposed to 26 degrees Celsius or a Humidex, we'll say, of 30, which is a little bit under heat stress, but not extreme heat stress, for 5 days of the 7, or 5 of the last 7 days. But then you have, 2 days that are extreme heat and you have a Humidex of 42, 43. Well, you're not acclimatized to that heat. So you really got to watch your workers for that. So you'd almost have to re-acclimatize for that. You might have some of the adaptations to heat, but not enough to be acclimatized to the higher levels of heat. So that's an important thing to remember as well. So that's one of the reasons we took out Humidex 2 is because it was being misused. So employers just assume that everyone was acclimatized, so we remove that option. If heat stress conditions allow for acclimatization, the workplace should follow the official TLB using the WBGT. So determining acclimatization, so this was for summer of 2023. So if you look at the summer, this would be for outdoor workers. So we have our acclimatization TLB threshold, which is the dotted red line. And you look at how much time was spent above that threshold where you can actually be acclimatized, which is 27.5 in WBGT. So you only had 3 days in July, and then you had one day at the end of July. So you almost had a 3-week period there. Well, yeah, basically a 3-week period where there wasn't any heat stress above the acclimatized threshold. So that person lost all of their adaptations before being exposed to heat again. And then again, at the end of the summer, in September, we had another 3 days. And looking at, and this is, there's no acclimatization even with solar radiation and wind velocity incorporated into WBGT. So this is looking at both or all three temperatures, right? So you got your radiation, you got your dry bulb with wind velocity, and your natural wet bulb. So and then again, if you're looking at 2024, basically the same thing. In June, we had 3 days, and then we had a full month, even more than that, of nothing above the acclimatized threshold. And then we had 2 days in August, and then another day at the end of August, and that was it. So really, outdoor workers, it's impossible to become acclimatized in Ontario. And this is also the most southern weather station. So we're looking at the Lincoln weather station. It's not the most southern. This is near London, I'm pretty sure. But still more southern than most places in Ontario. So the Humidex heat response plan. So this is kind of what you have here. So you have 5 steps, and we're going to go through these individually, and then you would apply that to your response plan with an adjusted Humidex. The reason it's adjusted is because you have to adjust for clothing and adjust for radiant heat. You're not only taking the measurement of the workplace. So first step is training. We talked about a lot about that already. So it's probably the most crucial element of the plan. Obviously, the knowledge that's gained could be used to save a life, and also it can be used to move towards the supported self-management. So the Humidex plan by itself cannot guarantee that workers will not be affected by heat stress. So it's essential that workers know and recognize the early signs and symptoms. And again, taking regular breaks, fluid intake, and in response to any early symptoms. So ideally, what we're trying to do is have the workers listen to their body. So that's where we're trying to get to. Okay, next you would want to select a measurement location. So a good location is within 10 meters of the exposure worker. So if you're looking at the workplace heat stress zones, you want to make sure that you have a hygrometer or your WBGT meter within 10 meters of the exposed workers. And you want to obviously identify a zone where measurements can be taken. And based on your action, if you want to base your actions on a single reading, then you got to select the highest heat stress zone. So wherever the highest heat is, that's where you want to take the measurement, and you would apply that to the entire workforce in that area anyway. And this is based on workplace measurements and not weather station or media reports, right? So for outdoor workers, you can use weather station, but it's not ideal. The best thing to do is to take something at the source itself. If you don't have access to it, so for workers, sometimes you don't have it, the employers aren't providing the thermometers or the hygrometers that you need. And just to make, to be self-aware, you can use weather station network for yourself. But again, you got to think of the other heat that's around. You might have some process heat, from tractors or things like that if you're outdoors. or furnaces if you're indoors. So obviously for indoor, you can't use a weather station, but for outdoor, there's some situations where you may be able to. But again, the best thing is to measure at the source within 10 meters with a hygrometer. So then you would measure the workplace humidity or humidex. So using a thermal hygrometer, so they're pretty cheap. They're $10 to $50 at hardware stores. They're pretty accurate. Simple way to measure the temperature and relative humidity in your workplace. Once you have the temperature and relative humidity, you would use a table to have your corresponding humidex value and the appropriate heat stress prevention response. But you need to remember you need to adjust for clothing and radiant heat. And measurements should be recorded at least hourly if humidex reaches 30 degrees humidex. And anything more than that, you should be recording a time-weighted average on the hourly. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So measuring temperature and relative humidity. So we have these older Dretton wet bulb temperatures, then you would apply it, or a sling psychrometer, you would apply it to this table here. But like I was mentioning, you can just purchase a thermal hygrometer. They're pretty accurate. They're usually within 0.5 degrees Celsius and 0.5% as well for humidex or for relative humidity. So they're fairly accurate and much easier to use. And they're cheaper than these other two pieces of equipment as well now. So it's a win-win. So once you have your number, you would place it in this table. This is actually this is the humidex table. We have a WBGT table as well. So if you're taking a measurement with a wet bulb glow thermometer, but you want to read, you want to know what the risk is with the WBGT table, Thomas Bernard actually converted humidex into WBGT. So that's another thing. You could take temperature and relative humidity and get an estimated WBGT. So I'll just try an example using humidex. So we have 30 degrees Celsius in the workplace. So what would the humidex be? Well, you don't know, right? You still need the relative humidity. So if you have a relative humidity of 50%, now what's the humidex? Oh, now we place that at 50. We get a humidex of 36 here. But then we need to adjust for clothing, right? So evaporating the sweat is primary way the body gets rid of excess heat buildup. So the best clothing is the kind that makes it easiest for sweat to evaporate. So the humidex plan assumes regular summer clothes. So that's a long sleeve t-shirt or long sleeve shirt, long pants, underwear, socks, and shoes. So that's regular summer clothes. So for workers who wear cotton overalls on top of the regular clothes, so you would have to add 5 to 6 degrees humidex to the workplace humidex measurement. And then for different types of clothing configurations, there's estimates for the clothing adjustments, comparing them to cotton coveralls. So if they're wearing gloves, hard hat, apron, protective sleeves, you might want to add a little bit. It'd be less than the overalls, but you would have to estimate that yourself. It'd be 1 to 2 degrees humidex, depending on what they're wearing and what the evaporative resistance is to that clothing as well. So if clothing does not allow for sweat evaporation, so something like encapsulated suits, heat stress should be managed by monitoring vital signs, which would be physiological monitoring. So here we have the official ACGIH clothing adjustment values. So if you look at just regular work clothes, you have an increase. Well, you don't have an increase; it's 0, and the 0 humidex. If you're wearing short sleeves and pants, then like a short sleeve shirt with pants, you would have a -1 in your WBGT and a -2 in your humidex, and then so forth. If you're wearing polypropylene coveralls, you're +1 humidex. And so on. So if you look at, vapor barrier coveralls with a hood, you're looking at +11 WBGT and +22 humidex. So again, if you're in this situation, you want to be using physiological monitoring for that. But what if you're required to wear leather gloves, hard hat, an apron, earmuffs? None of that is in this form. So OHCOW found an article that looked at different area, well, basically the amount of sweat coming from different areas of your body and relative to, well, 100%, right? So where is 100% of your sweat coming from? So they measured the head, the arms, the body, the core, the legs, everything. So from that, we were able to derive clothing adjustment values for different pieces of equipment or different pieces of PPE. So we have the different numbers here. They add 0.2 to 0.6, even 3 to the Humidex. And so if we added all of these together, so impervious gloves, apron, hard hat, earmuffs, so we have an estimate of about +2 in a Humidex. So what's the alternative is guessing. So this is a little bit more accurate than just saying, okay, well, I have all of this stuff, let's add 2, or let's add 3, or let's add 1, which is what it used to be. So now we actually have numbers to back that up. So adjusting for radiant heat as well. So because you're measuring thermal hygrometers, it does not measure radiant heat. So we need to adjust for this factor. So for outdoor work in direct sunlight between the hours of 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., you want to add 3 to 4 degrees Humidex. And you want to prorate that according to cloud cover. So if it's wide open direct sunlight, it's 3 to 4. If there's more cloud coverage, you might just do 2 to 3. And if it's fully like full cloud coverage, then you might not add anything. For indoor radiant heat exposure, you'd use common sense or judge whether it's the same as direct sunlight or more or less, and you'd estimate the appropriate proportion to the 3 to 4 degree unit adjustment factor. So if you're next to a furnace and you feel that it's a much warmer than being in direct sunlight, or 1.5 times warmer or 2 times warmer, you would estimate that yourself. If it's 2 times, you'd say, okay, well, let's add 4 or 8 degrees to this Humidex. If it's 1.5, you'd say, okay, 6, just things like that. So try an example of that as well. So it's 30 degrees in workplace, 50% relative humidity, have a Humidex of 36. So where they're working, so if we add the 2 from wearing gloves, apron, hard hats, earmuffs, now you're at 38, right? Humidex. But what about the outdoor sunshine? So what's the adjusted Humidex with the outdoor sunshine? So you would add 3 or 4, right, to the Humidex. So now let's say we add 3, we're at 41. So we just went through 3 different categories there based on just adjusting for clothing and adjusting for radiant heat. So that's why it's important to not just take the measurement that you're reading. You have to really adjust for what your workers are wearing, because the response changes significantly there. So what about taking breaks? If they're taking breaks indoors in a cafeteria, they have a temperature of 25 degrees Celsius with a relative humidity of 60. So that's a Humidex of 30 in the cafeteria. So if they're taking hourly breaks, so we need to look at time weighted average. And that's what I was talking about earlier. The TLV is based on a time weighted average. So it's best to do that for every measurement, whether it's a Humidex or the WBGT. And the heat stress TLV looks at hourly time weighted average, not 8-hour time weighted average like most other occupational exposure levels. So you need to take that average into account. So you're measuring over the hour. So what are you getting? So this is just calculating, not really, we just kind of added these for the purpose of making it quicker. So we have 6 measurements every 10 minutes. So we have 36, 37, 35, 36, and 34, and 38. So those are the measurements that you're getting at the location of heat stress. So you have a Humidex of 36 here over the hour. But what if we're taking 20-minute break in the cafeteria? So now you have your Humidex of 30 and your workstation Humidex is 36. So you got to take that time weighted average, right? So you're going to say, okay, well, 20 out of the 60 minutes times 30 Humidex, and then 40 out of 60 minutes times 36. And that'll give you a Humidex of 34. So now we still got to add the adjustments for clothing and for working outdoors in direct sunlight. So you'd add the 2 for clothing, add 3 for direct sunlight, and you end up with a Humidex of 39 with your breaks. So without the breaks, we're getting a Humidex of 41 adjusted. With the breaks, we're getting a Humidex of 39 for an adjusted Humidex. So now we're back into the lower response, right? So just things to consider, and it's important to look at all of the factors when measuring heat stress, that you can fall into different responses based on your adjustments. So important to look at the adjustments. This is the WBGT estimate table. So based on your temperature and relative humidity, Thomas Bernard had a calculation that will give you the effective WBGT estimate. And then if you're working direct sunlight, you would add 2.2 degrees Celsius of WBGT to the estimated table. So here we have both units. So based on the response, so you can see that the WBGT, or the effective WBGT, is quite a bit lower than the Humidex. So that's something you need to remember. WBGT is often lower than even the outdoor temperature. So you might be reading a WBGT meter and say, oh, it's not that hot. It's only 27 degrees. Whereas your regular thermometer or your hygrometer will say it's 33 degrees out. And then your Humidex is actually 40, or 42. So it's important to realize that a high WBGT is, basically anything over 27, you're in the heat stress zone. So, whereas it's anything over 20 or 39 in Humidex. There's a big difference there. So the ACGIH method, so this is moving on to the screening criteria, requires measurement of the WBGT. So you would need the machine and the knowledge and training on how to use it. You'd obviously need to follow the clothing adjustment considerations, which is why it's called an effective WBGT. You would assign the metabolic workload demand. So this is, with the Humidex-based response plan, it's based on a moderate workload. Whereas here, if you're using a heavy or very heavy workload, you would use the ACGIH method. You can determine acclimatization, whether the workers are acclimatized or not. Determine unadjusted work rest regime patterns. So, whether they're working for 15 minutes every hour, or half an hour or 30 minutes every hour. And then you would use table 3 to determine the need for any types of controls. Oh, sorry. Take that out. And it's based on a 1 hour time weighted average, like I mentioned earlier. So the metabolic categories. So here we have the 3 different ones. Well, we have low, which is below 235 watts. Moderate would be, 235 to 360. The average is 300. Heavy is, 415. Very heavy is 520. But the thing you got to take into account is the weight of the individual. So if all of this was estimated, or was, all of this was estimated on a body weight ratio of 70 kilograms or 154 pounds. So this was done in the 1960s using soldiers, which are, at the time were smaller and very fit people. So, 154 pounds is probably not the norm for males. So you got to adjust for the metabolic rate. So you take a ratio of that 154 pounds. So if someone weighs 200 pounds, you would divide that by 154 pounds and use that ratio to calculate your wattage. So someone who is 154 pounds might be in the moderate, but someone who's 200 pounds might be in the heavy or even very heavy category based on metabolic work. So we're all different, so it's something to consider. There's also the biological sex difference issue. So female sex at birth will often go through an ovulation period. And during that period, your body temperature will reach up to 38 degrees Celsius. So they might be more susceptible to heat stress at that time. Women who are pregnant and women going through menopause, same thing with the hormonal changes. Often your body is heating up where you're reaching that 38 degrees Celsius without activity. So then we have the TLV physiological monitoring. So again, there's some good and some bad with this, right? So there's concerns about collection and confidentiality of medical information. So if you are going to follow the TLV, you would need to have consent forms. You would need to have proper medical management of data. So it'd have to be locked up so that nobody can see it. There's a few legalities around that you'd have to do and follow. It can be used for self-calibration. So this is more for, other tools like Fitbits and watches that measure heart rate. And then, you can measure heart rate based on, you can measure heat stress based on your heart rate. So if you see that you have a sustained heart rate of 120 beats per minute, you know that you're under heat stress. If you're just, sitting there in the heat, often that's what happens. Or right after activity, your heart rate isn't coming back down below 120 beats per minute after a minute rest. So these are all things, and if you're noticing that with your watch, then you can kind of self-calibrate yourself, and it can really evolve into supported self-management because you kind of, just look at your watch. Holy geez, my heartbeat is super high right now. I know I'm under heat stress. I'm going to take a break, right? Things like that. But again, you need to remember that reliability and validity of self-monitoring technology isn't always the best. There's some that are better than others, and you can refer to the physiological monitoring guide for some of that information. So our heat stress calculator, we'll go through this quickly. How much time do I have left here? So let's go through the heat stress calculator. We'll show you that. So this is a new calculator, and it goes through all the assumptions to have a good heat stress program. So there are 6 assumptions. So it'll ask you what type of data you've collected. So we'll just go through this. So let's say we took, you can do both. So you can do detailed WBGT, or you could do temperature and relative humidity. Do temperature and relative humidity, it'll ask you, okay, well, what do you want, the Humidex or the WBGT estimate? So we'll do the Humidex. And then it'll ask you, so that this is the second, the second assumption, or the first assumption, where the measurement location, was the measurement taken within 10 meters? So we'll say yes to this as an example. And what was the temperature related? Let's say 28 degrees Celsius, relative humidity of 60%. So the other assumption is your training and knowledge. So you have to confirm your training and knowledge prior to moving forward. So this will take you to that sheet that I showed you earlier. And in order to have an adequate training, you need to be trained within the last year for a minimum of 10 to 30 minutes. And in person is ideal. Online interactive is okay, and video, well, it's not the greatest. So let's just go with video for now because a lot of people tend to do that. And I can explain that, I know what a heat rash is, I know what heat syncope is, I know what heat stroke is, I know that it can cause life or death, and I can recognize heat exhaustion system symptoms. So let's just say that that's all that we know. So it'll bring you here and say, okay, well, based on the information you provided, your training delivery program is rated as inadequate because you're only doing video, and your training outcomes are rated as minimal. So let's change that just for an example here. Okay, well, let's go. It was online interactive, and I did a workstation follow-up. It was within the last year. It was a 30 to 60-minute training, and I know who to contact. I know the limits of my body. I understand how heart rate can be monitored. I know, how much water to drink. I can check for hydration status. I know where to get water when I need it. I understand I need to drink more than thirst alone. I should be drinking every 20 minutes. I'm aware of emergency procedures. Uh, you know, understand that your body generates heat during activity. And I realize that personal cooling options are available, and I know the physical health conditions pose a risk factor for heat stress. So if I know all of these, well, now I have both of them are excellent. So my training delivery is excellent and my outcomes are excellent. So then it would go before you even get your number for Humidex, where are your workers working? Are they indoors? Are they outdoors? Let's say outdoors in the shade. And then the other assumption is your clothing. So are they wearing typical work clothing? Is yes, great. If not, you can't move forward until you select your PPE. So if yes, you can go select your PPE and they're just wearing regular work clothes. You can do that. Or you can hit yes, but they're also wearing regular work clothes and they're wearing an apron, they're wearing N95 respirator, we'll say, because they're grinding, hard hat, and a face shield. Okay, so now really it's they're wearing regular work clothes, but there's additional PPE there. And is there any radiant heat or moisture other than the sun? So if we say yes, typically it'll say, well, you should probably do the ACGI HTLV. But we could say yes here, there is a radiant demand for moisture, so it'll add it to the WBGT or to the Humidex. So now we click calculate, all your assumptions are in, and it'll give you your adjusted Humidex. So you have your Humidex 35 plus your 1.4 clothing PPE, so you have an adjusted Humidex 36, but it said that we had radiant heat. So here it should say something. Yeah, so there are additional exposures to radiant heat and moisture sources, and therefore this calculation may not fully include the full effect of these exposures. Consider using the detailed WBGT method instead. Okay, so that means that we would have to go back and do the detailed WBGT. So let's go back here. Oh, if we do another one here, we'll do the detailed WBGT and we'll show you the difference. So do I have a wet bulb glue thermometer? Yes, I do. Okay. If I don't, then it'll say you can't do that. You have to go back to the estimate method. So yes, I have one. We'll say it's 20, that's high. So we'll say it's 27 WBGT, which is pretty high. And I confirm my training and knowledge. I'll say within the last year in person, and I can do these and like 3 others just to see. You'll see that it's okay, sufficient, right? You have a sufficient training program and your training outcomes are sufficient. And then you're working outdoors in the shade, we'll say. PPE, say work clothes, same thing, impervious apron, N95, face shield, hard hat. Submit that, and yes, there is. So now you can specify, what are you exposed to? They will say that, we're grinding near let's say hot pavement. And it's about 100 to 200 degrees, and I'm 1 to 3 meters away. It's a presence of insulate, somewhat, not really. Proportion exposed time per hour. So we'll say more than 20 minutes per hour that you're next to. So now it'll give you your assumptions here again. Oh, and I'm doing a heavy workload because I'm constantly grinding. And how many workers? So again, so adjusting for weight, right? So let's say we're just doing the single worker say 195 pounds or 190 pounds. And then are they female sex at birth? No. It's a male doing the job. Okay. So then it'll tell you. So if you say female sex at birth, it'll give you another warning once you calculate that based on everything that we spoke about earlier. So now you have your WBGT 27, your work, your clothing and WBGT at 0.7 extra, and effective WBGT would be 27.7 degrees. And then you would have your warnings here for each one, right? So your training is sufficient, your assumptions are good, your typical clothing is there, and this is what your measurement would be. So, and again, here would be looking at the metabolic rate issue as well. So it just tells you that, you know, it took that into account. So that is what our calculator looks like. Let's go back here. What am I looking for here? Where's my PowerPoint? I guess it got out of it. So anyways, so this is kind of what we end up with here. So it provides, so it checks all your 6 assumptions, which we talked about, and only after responding to 6 assumptions, you proceed to temperature, relative humidity. So you end up with your summary here. We also have the SOP, like I spoke about. So if you don't have a heat stress management plan, you can contact myself or John Audick, and we can give you this SOP. There's one as part of the toolkit online, so you can also get it there. So yeah, if there's any questions about the toolkit, you can ask them now, or you can email myself. My email is there, or John. And yeah, that's basically it. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Andre. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think I went a little bit over time. Sorry
Well,
about
that's
that.
okay. There's a number of questions, but I'll try to limit them. Some of them I believe are likely beyond the scope of your presentation and what you were trying to relay here. Does the tool take into account the level of work intensity in watts?
Well, you would have to calculate that, but yes, it does. Like the tool is like the calculator. That's why when you look at the calculator, you can check, you know, low, moderate, heavy, especially if you have to go in the detailed TLV for that though. If you're only doing the Humidex plan, it's based on moderate activity and that's it. So if you are working with heavy workloads or very heavy workloads, and you can calculate that in watts based on, you know, what kind of work you're doing. You'd have to look at, you know, there's research papers out there, but if let's go back to right here. See, so this is, you know, moderate workload is sustained moderate hand and arm work, moderate arm leg work, moderate arm trunk work, or light pushing and pulling, normal walking. Heavy workloads instead, it'd be more intense, carrying, shoveling, manual sawing, pushing, pulling heavy objects, walking at a fast pace. Then very heavy is very intense activity, so the fast to maximum pace. And then you would, you know, calculate the metabolic rate based on the individual.
Okay. Yeah, there's a number of questions on hydration and electrolytes and stuff, but I believe those are probably beyond this. But other than urine color, what are there other indicators that you can use for hydration levels for workers?
Well, you can see if they're getting sluggish and things like that. Most of the time, they're starting to become dehydrated. Again, a lot of that is self-management, right? Knowing your hydration levels and things like that. Training is huge. Making sure that they know that and posting the, you know, the urine charts and things like that would be good. Because you're not going to know whether they're dehydrated or not until they start, you know, having symptoms. And those are the ones that you would see, right? Whether they're having heat rashes or muscle cramps or even just, you know, fainting or just general tiredness.
Okay. All right, that's good. Thank you. I think we'll get moving on to the next one because yes, you did go a little over time. Trevor, are you back online? I know you lost internet, or who is the next presenter? Daryl? Okay, I'll
Yep.
just introduce. So the next presenters are going to be Daryl Stephenson and Andrew Flanagan from OHCOW on manual material handling, and I'll let you guys take it away.
Great. Can you see my screen good?
Yes, I can. Yeah, everything looks good here, Daryl.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dwayne. So hi, my name is Daryl Stephenson, and I'm the ergonomist from the OHCOW clinic in Hamilton. And today I'm joined with by Andrew Flanagan, who's the ergonomist at the Sarnia clinic for OHCOW. And we're going to be talking about ergonomics and manual materials handling. So today's presentation is going to cover some topics related to musculoskeletal disorders, and we'll start with an introduction to MSDs, discussing their causes and their impact. And then we're going to explore how to recognize and control for these MSD hazards in the workplace. And we'll also dive into manual material handling techniques, which can help reduce the risk. And then finally, at the end, we'll go over how to assess and manage the risk to prevent MSDs from occurring. So MSDs are painful conditions that affect muscles, tendons, and nerves, and they're typically caused by repetitive tasks or stress on the body tissues. So they can result from repetitive motions, awkward postures, sustained forces that lead to gradual wear and tear on the musculoskeletal system. So MSDs are often also called things like repetitive strain injuries, RSIs, cumulative trauma disorders, sprains and strains. And so you might hear it in multiple forms. So some of the most commonly injured areas during manual materials handling activities are going to be the lower back, which is highly vulnerable to injury, especially during heavy lifting, especially with poor posture. The vertebral disc disorders are a major concern here. Also the tendons, so the connecting tissues from the muscles to the bones, can be prone to strain and inflammation due to repetitive or sudden forceful movements. And also the wrist can be repetitively used. It can be used in so many dynamic ways with working, especially with manual materials handling. So repetitive or forceful gripping or awkward wrist positions during the lifting or pushing or pulling can lead to things like tendonitis and sprains. So we'll briefly go over some anatomy of the back. The spine is divided into four main sections. Each part of the spine plays a crucial role in supporting the body and protecting the spinal cord. So in the green down there, we see the lumbar vertebrae, which are located in the lower back and are particularly important. And these vertebrae are larger compared to the ones higher up in the spine. And this is because they are designed to bear much of the body's weight and handle stresses from lifting, bending, and the twisting motions. So as a result, they are more prone to injury when subjected to excessive loads or improper postures. Back muscles are really crucial for movement and posture. They enable the bending, the twisting, the lifting. They help stabilize the spine to prevent injury, and they help keep the vertebrae aligned. There's two main layers, the superficial layer that assists with the larger movements, and then the deep layer, which acts more to stabilize the spine and maintain posture. Yeah, now let's quickly look at the ligaments surrounding the spine, and these are going to be the tough elastic fibers that connect the bone to bone. These fibers play a key role in stabilizing the spine. So they work by connecting and stabilizing the vertebrae in a unified structure, preventing the excessive movement that could lead to injury or misalignment. So between each vertebrae in the spine are the intervertebral discs. And often these are referred to as the spine's shock absorbers. And these discs help cushion and protect the vertebrae by absorbing the impact from the movement and pressure. However, when these large forces or awkward postures act on these discs, injuries can occur. And this can happen suddenly, or it may develop gradually over time due to repetitive stresses. And the health and integrity of these discs are really crucial for maintaining proper spinal function and preventing discomfort or long-term injury. Tendinitis occurs when the smooth gliding of a tendon is impaired, leading to inflammation. And this causes pain and irritation when using the affected muscle. And it's most commonly found in tendons that have poor blood supply as they struggle to heal after the repetitive strain. The main causes of tendinitis include things like excessive strain from heavy loads, repetition of certain movements, static or awkward postures, and these factors that place continuous stress on the tendon, not allowing it to heal properly and making it more likely to become inflamed and painful in the long run. So again, the wrist is highly flexible, can move in many different directions, allowing us to perform a wide range of tasks. And many tasks, such as lifting or using tools, can cause the wrist to flex, extend, and deviate from its neutral position. And these repetitive movements, especially under high forces and stress, without proper rest, can really increase the risk of injury, especially in these awkward positions. So one thing that can be an MSD of using the wrist over and over is carpal tunnel syndrome, or CTS. And this occurs when the median nerve is compressed underneath the ligaments in the wrist. And this compression can lead to a variety of symptoms. So things like numbness, tingling, or reduced grip strength. And it's really caused by this excessive force on the wrist, the awkward postures, repetitive movements, and prolonged gripping. Okay, and vibration can be definitely a hazard when dealing with manual materials handling. And they can be categorized as either whole body vibration or segmental vibration. So whole body vibration can come from equipment like tractors and vehicles and increase the risk of vertebral disc herniation and degeneration. Segmental vibration from tools and machinery. And the different frequencies that come from vibration affect different areas of the body, leading to these various MSD and nerve issues. Okay, so MSDs can develop gradually over time. So it's very crucial to be proactive in addressing the potential issues before that they escalate. It's important to take action before reaching the pain or injury stage, and indicators should trigger some action. So things like if you see people reporting pain or discomfort to a supervisor often, or taking frequent breaks to rest and recover, maybe they're shaking their hands or rubbing body parts to relieve tension, or if they're fatigued, and wearing additional products like braces to support themselves when they're doing different lifting. Maybe the wrist is hurting, so they start wearing wrist braces, or their back's hurting. We do get a lot of places, I get a lot of companies that ask me, we have a lot of back problems. Can we just wear back braces? And I say, well, really, we should be trying to design the job so that you don't have those problems and you don't have to resort to those measures, because it's an indicator that something's wrong there and that there potentially could be injuries coming. So MSDs are influenced by a variety of these risk factors, which often act in combination rather than isolation. These factors can increase the likelihood of injury or strain on the MSD system. And these risk factors don't really act alone. They often combine in the workplace to create a higher risk for MSDs. So being aware of all of these factors and trying to minimize all of them can really help reduce the injury. And when I'm going through and doing ergonomic assessments, I'm looking to see all these different factors and how I can reduce all of them. It might be obvious that a high force is the problem there, but you still want to understand that they all work in combination leading up to these MSDs. So we want to try and reduce all of them if we can. So force is a key factor in musculoskeletal disorders, and it can come in two different forms. So external forces, which are the forces applied to the body by outside objects. For example, the weight of an object being held places external force on the body. Then the internal forces, which are the forces generated by the muscles in response to the task demands. So example might be the force required by the shoulder or neck to support the arms during lifting or holding, leading to that fatigue and strain over time. So a single high load injury occurs when an extremely high force is applied to the body in a short period of time, which ends up overwhelming the body's ability to withstand the load, causing that injury. So we can see on that graph there, we have the failure tolerance, and when that load gets too high, it can overcome that, leading to injury. Repetition refers to performing the same or similar movements or tasks over a given period of time, often by the same muscle group. So when movements are repeated, the muscles under continuous strain, which requires greater recovery time to prevent the injury and fatigue. Without proper rest and recovery, this repetitive stress can lead to overuse injuries and MSDs. And the one big thing with repetition, it's about the rest time. So if you're using different muscle groups and you're doing different tasks, you are giving those muscles rest. But if you're just doing the same movements over and over, you end up using the same muscles over and over, and you end up not getting that rest time for those particular muscles. So as we perform the task repeatedly, the body faces this continuous stress, which has a significant impact on its ability to resist injury. So in this graph, we can see how the failure tolerance line there, the maximum force the body can withstand, it's going to decrease over time as these repetitive loads are applied. And each time the same muscles, tendons, or joints are subjected to strain, their ability to tolerate further stress weakens. So again, it leads us to this importance of rest. So when we apply the load to the body, it's going to cause these tiny micro tears in the tissues. And these micro tears are part of the natural process of the muscle and tendon use, but they need time to heal. So this rest is really essential for this because it allows the tissues to recover and become stronger, increasing their ability to tolerate stress in the future. So without this adequate rest, these micro tears don't fully heal and they can grow into more severe injuries. And this highlights why recovery time is just as important as the activity time to avoid these long-term damage and maintain overall muscle health. So neutral postures refer to the position that's going to minimize the stress on the body by aligning the muscles, the joints, and the bones in their most natural state. It's going to be the safest and most efficient position to work in, as it reduces the strain on the muscles, the ligaments, and tendons, and allows them to function optimally. Maintaining this neutral posture through the daily tasks helps prevent fatigue, discomfort, and MSDs. So awkward postures can significantly increase the risk of injury by forcing the body into unnatural positions. When we adopt these awkward postures, the muscles operate less efficiently. So you can see that in that wrist picture there, when the wrist is at its neutral posture, it's 100% strength. When it deviates, it can be reduced in strength down to 45% there. So this extra effort is going to lead to fatigue, more strain, and discomfort over time. So some examples of these would be bending over, twisting, overhead reaching, and these positions are going to add additional stress to the joints, tendons, making them more susceptible to injury. So here are some examples just of different awkward postures that are commonly observed in different tasks. And these, again, put more strain on the body and increase the risk of injury. And it's important to know that, you can see things here like turning your neck to the side. And if you're doing that dynamically throughout the day, as long as it's not in a repetitive fashion or holding that position for a long time, that's okay to move your body, move around, be flexible. But it's when you're working in those postures for sustained periods or when there's a lot of force while working in those postures and you're really trying to hold the awkward postures for long periods of time, it's going to add up and amplify the issues. So static postures occur when a person holds the same position for a long period of time. When this happens, the blood flow to the muscles is reduced, preventing them from getting the oxygen and nutrients that they need to function properly. And this lack of circulation can lead to early onset of fatigue and discomfort, which makes it harder to maintain that posture and perform the task effectively. So over time, static postures can really contribute to muscle strain and other MSD issues. Holding these static postures for extended periods can gradually reduce the body's failure tolerance. So the same graph here, the ability to withstand the stress and load without injury. So it's essential to change positions frequently and to take breaks and give the muscles that you're using in those positions a chance to recover to avoid the negative effects of static postures. Okay, and then there's also contact stress, which occurs when the tissues of the body become in direct contact with hard or sharp objects, resulting in increased pressure on those areas. And this direct pressure affects the underlying tendons and nerves, reducing blood flow to the affected areas over time, which can lead to discomfort, pain, and even tissue damage. And contact stress, what it can also do is when people are working with contact stress, they often try to avoid it. So even for that computer picture there, they'll tend to shrug their arms up more to avoid that. Once that starts to be painful, they'll start to avoid it. Or maybe if they don't have those knee pads when they're moving around materials, they'll end up just bending over and working at an awkward posture for their back. So trying to eliminate this contact stress might also help eliminate things like awkward postures. So extreme temperatures can have significant impact on health of the muscles, and Andre just talked a lot about this, so I won't go into this too much, but the cold is definitely going to have an effect on the muscles and tendons, making them less flexible, increasing the risk of strains. The blood circulation to the arms and hands is going to be reduced. And then with heat, obviously, we're going to have things like dehydration, reducing the efficiency and recovery. And both these extreme cold and heat can contribute to MSDs if the precautions are not taken. Psychosocial hazards at work can significantly impact the employee well-being and contribute to MSDs as well. So some of the key hazards to look out for would be things like work demands, work organization, work values, the relationships at work, work-life balance, and the offensive behaviors that they might experience. And these factors ultimately lead to more stress for the individuals that can cause burnout and physical strain. And you know, people who are stressed, they've shown that they'll work a little more tense, and their muscles will be more tense throughout the day, and their actions will be more forceful. Even when doing something like typing on a keyboard, they'll type harder keystrokes. So ultimately that leads to using more force, using their muscles more, having less rest time, and potentially leading to MSD issues. So to control for these hazards, we try to think in this using the hierarchy of controls, starting with the most effective strategies, especially for manual materials handling. We're going to try and eliminate the hazards, so remove the hazard task or process entirely if possible. If you can't remove the task, then try to replace it. So substituting a hazardous task with a safer one, such as using lighter materials, or maybe instead of carrying a load a long distance, now you can put it on a trolley and push it, or use a conveyor belt or something like that. So trying to replace that hazard. Isolate the hazard, so use barriers or automation to prevent the exposure to the hazard. Then comes things like training people on how to lift, how to do those things, rotating their jobs, rotating the tasks that they're doing, with an emphasis on thinking about which muscles groups are being used. You don't want to rotate jobs and have them just use the same muscles over and over, because you're not really getting anything out of that rotation. So when you're thinking about job rotation, you should be thinking about using different muscles, using different parts of the body in these different rotated jobs. Okay, and then the last line of defense is that personal protective equipment, the last resort, and use equipments like gloves or back supports to reduce the exposures. So can lifting technique make a difference? Yes, definitely. It can be a big part of it. If people can build these good habits, it's going to help them in the long run. It's the same idea when you're training for working out in a gym. A good trainer is going to get people in there and start off slow and light and build that good form so that you can progress, work harder without being injured. So definitely lifting technique can make a difference. So we'll go over some of that now. So lifting and carrying items can pose a risk to your back's health, but using safe lifting principles can help you protect your back and keep you comfortable. So we use this BACK acronym, so principles of lifting. So trying to keep the back straight, avoid twisting, keep the items close to your body, and keep the motion smooth. So when the back is straight, the discs in your spine can handle larger loads without the risk of injury compared to that bent picture. And you can see with those two pictures there. So to maintain a neutral spine position, always bend at the knees and hips, not just the waist. And this can ensure better alignment and reduce strain on the back. Maintaining a neutral spine helps to align the torso and preserves the spine's natural curves. And this is going to help keep the torso moving smoothly and reduces the stress on the muscles and the discs, ultimately preventing strain and injury. So avoiding twisting is going to be a big one. Twisting while lifting puts a lot more strain on the spine as the discs are weaker in this position. To avoid this injury, always try to pivot your feet and move without twisting your torso while moving objects. And this ensures the body's mechanics and reduces the risk of strain. And I see this one quite often when I've been to different places for ergonomic assessments. You know, I see a lot of people just twisting the whole time and really working on, okay, pivot, move your whole body, almost like you're a robot twisting your whole body and you can't twist. Try to figure it out that you can do it efficiently without just twisting, because that twisting is going to put a lot more strain on your spine. When lifting, your back joints act as a fulcrum, and your muscles really counterbalance the weight of the object. So the further the object is going to be away from your body, the more stress that it's going to be placed on your back. So to reduce this stress, try to keep the object as close to your body as possible. Also trying to raise the center of gravity of the object. So getting the object higher before you have to lift it up is going to reduce the force required to lift. So we can see here with these ideal places to lift on the picture to the right, the green zone, trying to lift from that area, trying to avoid the highs and the lows and far away. So to protect your back, always keep moving smooth while lifting. Avoid sudden, forceful movements, as they're going to increase the strain on the discs. And similarly, try not to release the force abruptly, as it can cause injury. So right when you get to your destination, don't just try to drop it or release it. And especially when you're lifting with a partner, you're going to want clear communication to make sure that all the force doesn't land on one person at once, and make it smooth and coordinated. So lifting is going to be affected by, obviously the object weight. If things are too heavy, object size, the symmetry, the vertical and horizontal location, and the grip. And I saw a comment in the that just popped up. Yes, if something's definitely too heavy, don't lift it and test it. Go and see, and if it's, you don't want to put yourself in any position where you could be injured, and that job should be changed. Heavier weights are going to increase the difficulty of lifting and increase the likelihood of using poor technique and the risk of injury. So try to use lifting aids where possible, or get help from a partner, test the weight, and always use proper lifting technique. But if it is too heavy, don't lift it. The vertical distance, and like we've seen in that other picture with the red and the yellow and the green, affects the difficulty of the tasks, so increases reaching and heights the risk of injury, really decreasing safety. So try to keep those heavier objects lower, around that knuckle to chest height, and try to minimize that vertical travel distance as much as possible. And really just try to avoid overhead work when possible. Similar to keeping it close to the body, just increasing the horizontal distance from your torso is going to increase the effort and the force required. The dimensions of the object can also affect the lifting. So larger objects increase the difficulty. They make decrease the grip and the control. So to reduce the strain, always aim to decrease that horizontal distance as well. Unbalanced lifting can also lead to awkward postures like twisting or leaning, which can create unbalanced force production. This is going to increase the stress on the muscles and the discs and potentially raise the probability of injury. So try to avoid just single-handed carry with very heavy loads for long times. Try to balance the loads out where you can. Use lifting aids again when possible, and get help from a partner if you need it. Your grip is definitely one thing to think about. Can have a large impact on the forces required. Poor grip or poor coupling increases the risk of injury by reducing the control and increasing the strain on the hands and the wrist. So avoiding things like slippery objects or using pinch grips or awkward grips, awkward shaped objects, or understanding the differences with different gloves and making sure that you have good gloves that fit you. If you're wearing gloves that are too small, you're going to be squeezing a lot harder just to do the same tasks. Or if your gloves are too big, it could be awkward and loose and slippery. So making sure that you have fitted gloves, that they're the proper gloves for the proper task that you're doing, right? Really, really thick gloves can add to the grip strength that you have to use for certain objects. So making sure that you have the proper gloves for the proper tasks that you're doing. Okay, so there are different products out there too. So to minimize, aim for a firm, secure grip that's comfortable. There's tools out there that can add to your grip for different objects. So it can be useful to look around for these. There's all different types out there. So depending on what task you're doing, there might be something out there that's designed to make your grip a little bit better. And just quickly for vibration, controlling for vibration, just in general, report any poorly maintained equipment to your supervisor, ensure good suspension systems and correct tire pressure. If your seat has hydraulic dampers or shock absorbers, make sure to adjust and fit it for your weight and your height. Slow down when driving over potholes or rough terrain, and take the breaks that you need. Get out of the vehicle every hour or so to stand, stretch, give your body a break from that vibration. So in some situations, the standard lifting technique may not be feasible due to the object or the task that you're doing. And in these cases, an alternative lifting technique can be used to reduce strain and prevent injury. In the next 3 slides, we have 3 videos demonstrating some different lifting techniques for the various scenarios. And it's actually André from the presenter from the previous heat stress, who's in these videos doing these.
Use the partial squat lift for small light objects with handles close to knee height. Stand with the object close to your side. Place your feet shoulder width apart. Keep your back straight. Push your buttocks out and slowly lower yourself down to reach the object's handles. Prepare for the lift. Grasp the object and look forward. Lift upwards following your head and shoulders. Lift by extending your legs with your back straight, your buttocks out, and breathe out as you lift. Use the partial squat lift for this lift is used for bulky or awkward items at floor level. Put one foot next to the object. Keep your back straight. Push your buttocks out and slowly lower yourself down onto one knee. For support as you lower yourself down, put one hand on a stool or on your thigh for support. Position the object close to the knee on the ground. Grasp the object firmly with both hands. Slide the object from the knee on the ground to mid-thigh. Keep your head forward, your back straight, and your buttocks out, and lift the object onto the opposite thigh. Put both of your forearms under the object, with your palms facing upwards, and hug the object to your stomach and chest. Prepare for the lift looking forward. Lift upwards following your head and shoulders. Hold the load close to your body. Lift by extending your legs with your back straight, your buttocks out, and breathe out as you lift.
So that one's a good example of trying to raise the center of gravity of the object. He's getting it a little bit higher up onto his leg there before actually doing the squat movement up. So that's, again, trying to raise the center of gravity there a bit.
This lift is appropriate for light objects that can be lifted with one hand. Place hand near the edge of a fixed surface if possible to support your upper body during the lift. Keep your back straight and raise one leg as you lean down to pick up the object. The weight of your leg will counterbalance the weight of your upper body. Grasp the object firmly. Prepare for the lift. Look forward. Keep your leg raised as you start the lift. To lift, keep your back straight and breathe out. This lift.
Okay, so now Andrew is going to take over.
All right, thanks, Daryl. I'll just try and share my screen here. So you can just let me know if you're able to see it.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so I'll just jump right in where Daryl left off here. So when carrying loads to protect your back, you want to move at your feet and avoid twisting. Keep the load close to your body and maintain a neutral posture. If the load is too heavy, use a wheelbarrow or a cart to minimize the risk. Looking at pushing and pulling tasks, when using a device such as a cart or a dolly to move a load, we should consider human factors like height, strength, and age, along with task demands such as distance, force, duration. Equipment design matters too, so things like handle height, handle design, wheel type, and stability all affect performance. And lastly, we want to check the floor conditions to be aware of anything that may increase force requirements like matting or soft surfaces. In order to reduce strain and minimize the distance that you push or pull, we can relocate and reorganize materials and make sure our layout is efficient. Also, we should always avoid pushing carts through crowded areas by having a route planned prior to starting the push to prevent accidents. Whenever possible, we want to eliminate pushing and pulling by using tools like conveyors, powered trucks, lift tables, or slides to move loads more safely and efficiently. In order to reduce force when pushing or pulling, we should improve our grip and reduce the load size. So this may mean taking multiple trips if needed. We should always use dollies with low centers of gravity, excuse me, and a wide wheelbase to improve stability and control. And it's important to ensure that preventative maintenance is completed on these carts for smoother movement. Finally, we always want to make sure that our floors are in good condition, eliminating, maintaining cracks and bumps, and ensuring that we have proper footwear with good grip and traction. In order to optimize pushing and pulling tasks, we should eliminate one-handed movements where possible. Always use both hands for better control and stability. Excuse me, sorry. Providing adjustable handle heights can help accommodate employees of different heights, and having vertical handles helps to maintain more neutral wrist posture when pushing or pulling. We should always try to use ramps with a slope of less than 10% to make pushing easier and safer. Additionally, we should keep the load within our more powerful range, so between our mid-thighs and our shoulders, to minimize the risk of injury. When moving objects, we should try to push instead of pull for better efficiency and safety. Pushing helps better utilize your body weight, giving you more control and power over the movement. With pushing, you can see the travel path ahead, and this reduces the risk of coming into contact with obstacles or misdirection. Pushing allows you to use both hands as opposed to just one, and it offers better stability and control. And finally, pushing keeps your spine aligned, preventing twisting and reducing strain on your back. When performing a push task, we want to keep our hands below our shoulders, closer to waist level, without bending at the back. So we want to maintain that neutral posture. And this allows the push force to be directed through the lower back and allows for use of stronger leg muscles. Similarly, when we're performing a pull task, so in this picture, this person's about to open a door, we want to keep our hands between shoulder and waist height to allow the force to come from our leg muscles in a neutral back posture. As you can see in the photo, the worker in the photo on the right, the worker is likely going to have to utilize the muscles of their back, upper back and shoulder, and it's probably going to result in some twisting motion to apply the force. Whereas in the picture on the left, the force can travel right through the lower back and avoid the twisting motion. Okay, getting into hazard identification and risk assessment. There's some research out of Belgium that discusses the various levels of hazard identification using the acronym SOBANE. So in this, 60% of workplace hazards are identified at the screening level. Workers identify hazards based on their firsthand experience by utilizing things like body mapping, surveys, or OHCOW apps such as Pinpoint or Hazard Assess. At the next level, we see 25% of hazards identified, And this type of investigation can be done by joint health and safety committees, includes tools such as checklists or the OHCOW app Job Assess. At the analysis stage, we see 12% of hazards identified. And this is a detailed, more quantitative evaluation that's often conducted by health and safety professionals using tools such as RULA, REBA, Liberty Mutual tables, and many more. Finally, we look at the expertise level. So at this level, external experts are brought in to address complex issues beyond the organization's internal capacity. And this could be using tools such as human modeling software or conducting studies to quantify and solve a problem. So we're going to go through the bullet points on the right of this slide in greater detail on the coming slides here. So working our way through hazard identification, risk assessment list, we'll begin with body mapping. Body mapping can help to identify common health and safety issues and workplace risks. It helps recognize problems and the need for further investigation and helps communicate these findings to stakeholders. Body mapping is a simple visual tool whereby a worker marks their places of discomfort on an image, such as the one that you can see on this slide. So if they're experiencing shoulder discomfort, they would mark an X on the shoulder to indicate that they're experiencing discomfort there. Some of the benefits of body mapping are that they encourage discussion, so workers can easily report symptoms and share experiences, discussing what they feel may be contributing to their discomfort. It's simple and they're visual, they're easy to use, and they're widely understood. So even people who have language or literacy challenges, language barriers, not affected in body mapping. If completed on many workers, body mapping can identify trends and can reveal common health and safety issues in specific jobs, areas, or workplaces. Moving on to surveys. Surveys can be an effective way to identify workplace hazards by gathering feedback directly from workers. They can identify hidden risks and capture hazards that might otherwise go unnoticed. Surveys can be anonymous, which can encourage participation and provide valuable insights. Surveys are simple, flexible, and can be customized for specific tasks or concerns. And they can also help prioritize safety improvements based on real data. When developing surveys, it's important to take the bullet points on this slide into consideration, just to ensure maximum effectiveness of the survey. Looking at checklists, checklists provide a structured way to identify hazards. Talking to workers gets firsthand insights. Observing work helps to see how tasks are performed in real time. Findings from checklists can be documented by taking notes, drawing diagrams, and capturing photos. And finally, checklists can help prioritize action by using findings by deciding where to place focus. Some of the strengths of checklists are that they're simple to use and easy to administer, making them an effective hazard identification tool. They serve as a reminder to observers, ensuring that critical factors are not overlooked. Checklists can help define relationships between various factors, and they're particularly useful for breaking down operational procedures. The method provides reliable results with high consistency among different observers, evaluating the same activities, which can reinforce the validity. Checklists also have limitations, as they offer little insight into specific problems and only highlight risk factors without promoting deeper conceptual thinking. So the yes-no format can make it difficult to argue for change due to the lack of detailed information. Checklists provide no assistance in generating new ideas, and ultimately they represent only the first step in the hazard identification process. This is just an example of a checklist that can be used to identify MSD hazards. So it lists various hazards and allows the user to check off if they have been exposed to that hazard. So checklists are strong, simple ways to identify when a hazard exists if it's included on the list, but they lack where there's missing information. So therefore, it's important to work with stakeholders and ensure that checklists are properly developed to be all-encompassing. Moving into some of the apps that can be used, the OHCOW app Pain Point provides a basic ergonomic assessment displaying results on a body map. It offers recommendations to address work-related musculoskeletal disorder hazards and allows users to share their results summary. The app also stores a history of results for tracking progress and allowing follow-ups. So this app is available to be downloaded in the App Store on your smartphone. It can be found on our OHCOW website. Hazardous is another OHCOW app that was developed by OHCOW in conjunction with Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, or CCOHS. The app allows you to take action to reduce or eliminate health and safety risks in your workplace by guiding you through 12 distinct health and safety topics that prompt you to describe the hazard, identify its source or cause, and to provide ideas on how to fix it. It also allows you to take pictures and mark them up with circles and arrows if needed. And then from there, you can create a PDF report. It can be emailed to applicable health and safety contacts for follow-up. Prevention resource links are also included in the app so that you can learn more about various hazards and the associated risks, along with ideas on what changes can be made to improve workplace conditions. Taking a quick look at RULA here. So it was developed by McAdamy and Corlett, and it provides an easily calculated rating of musculoskeletal load in tasks where people have a risk of neck and upper limb loading. The tool provides a single score. It's a snapshot of the task, which is a rating of the posture, force, and movement required. So this tool depends on accurate interpretation of postures to produce accurate scores. Limitations of this tool are that RULA only acts as a snapshot to provide insight. So it's only based on posture, single posture. It does not consider duration, recovery time, hand-arm vibration, and it is unilateral. There's also REBA, which was also created by McAdamy and Hignett. And REBA was completed similarly to RULA, but it aims to capture the entire body posture. Similarly, REBA provides a single score as a snapshot of the task, which is a rating of the posture, force, and movement required. REBA was designed to be sensitive to the type of unpredictable working postures found in healthcare and other service industries. Moving into the Liberty Mutual tables, data is entered into a calculator, as I'll demonstrate in the couple coming slides here, in a couple slides. Excuse me. And the metric that's derived from the calculator is the population percentile. So this is the percent of the population that can be expected to do a specific task and quoting without straining themselves or without becoming unusually tired, weakened, overheated, or out of breath. The score can be calculated for lifting, lowering, pushing, pulling, or carrying tasks. And the Liberty Mutual manual material handling calculator tool is available to everyone at the link at the bottom of this slide here on the Liberty Mutual website. So with the Liberty Mutual manual material handling calculator, musculoskeletal pain or injuries do not only occur because of the severity of the task parameters. So based on this, they should not be evaluated based solely on population percentages. Other important considerations are, if a job is causing injuries, it should probably be redesigned. Frequent bending, twisting, and reaching, regardless of weight, is not recommended. The tool does not evaluate one-handed tasks. Overall, the tool should be used for designing tasks so that as many workers as possible, speaking as percentage of population, can perform the task without risk of injury. So I apologize for the size of the image here, but if you can see the titles and then the units that have been entered. Just as an example, the categories of information that we need are task type, system of units, hand coupling, frequency of lifts, so lifts per minute, object weight, start hand height and end hand height, start hand distance, and end hand distance. Once we have all of these things entered, we select calculate at the bottom there. And in the box to the right, you'll see the population percentage capable of performing that task. So in this case, we have 5 lifts per minute with a weight of 30 pounds. So it's, a lift. Almost every 12 seconds you're doing a lift. And it's quite heavy, 30 pounds. So based on this, less than, we can see in the box on the right, less than 1% of the female population is capable of performing this task. So in this case, it would not be considered a safe task, and we would want to redesign this to make it so that a larger portion of the population was capable of completing. Generally speaking, that's 75% of the female population. OHCOW also has Job Assess app that can be found on our website at the link here, and this can be used to accurately and efficiently perform a job demands analysis. It could also be used to just look at a specific task if you wanted to. So a My OHCOW account must first be created so that reports can be saved, so you can access later to view the information or update the reports as your jobs change. Getting into Job Assess, the app allows users to select the unit of measurement as well as what they want to capture in the assessment. So like I said, if you only wanted to capture the psychosocial factors, or if you wanted to just look at the physical demands, you could just select those boxes, and then that would be what was presented to you within the app moving forward. There's 9 different sections if you're completing an assessment for all areas. Otherwise, only those selected will show up. So you can navigate between sections by selecting the icons. And as I mentioned before, your work is saved within your My OHCOW account, so it can be accessed at a later date. As you work through Job Assess, there's options to select red flags associated with each area of concern. So if you're completing something and you identify it to be a high-risk activity, or if a worker says to you, this is really challenging for me, and that could be a way that you may identify that it should be flagged. And all of these flags and notes will be captured in the final report to help you go back and read the summary. Sections related to physical tasks include a Borg scale to capture rating of perceived exertion to allow for some qualitative input. So as you're evaluating or completing this analysis and you're working with a worker who may be completing the job, you can ask them, what is your rating of perceived exertion when completing this task? And that can give some insight into the difficulty of the task and how the workers are feeling about it. Reports are generated that show results that can be saved and exported as a PDF. And these can also be exported as a CSV or Excel file, where the data can then be further sorted to identify high-risk categories. Or if you wanted to compare results between jobs or departments, you'd be able to do that there. Having a saved bank of JDAs would allow the user to make small changes. So as I mentioned, they are saved in your My OHCOW account. And you can go back and make small changes to the job without having to go in and recreate an entire report. And the picture on the right here, these are just, they're not real assessments, they're just examples of how your page would look when you're logged in. Okay, and that wraps up assessment tools. So in summary today, we went through an intro to MSDs commonly associated with manual material handling. We discussed how to identify MSD hazards commonly associated with manual material handling. We discussed common MMH tasks, and we introduced methods for assessing risk associated with these tasks. And I know this was a lot of information between what Daryl and I just presented. So please know that this presentation will be available on OHCOW's YouTube channel. And I think it's also available as a PDF of the slides. Please also keep in mind that OHCOW ergonomists are available to work with your Joint Health and Safety Committee in Ontario to identify risks and help you develop solutions to control some of these risks. So with that, if there's any questions, Daryl and I are happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I would just a reminder, if people could please take a few minutes to complete the post-survey questions that are popping up in the bottom right of the screen. And with that, I'll turn over to Dwayne to answer any or ask any questions of our speakers.
Thanks, Trevor. Thank you, Andrew and Daryl. That was a very good presentation. There are many questions that were posted in the chat, but a good majority of them were answered throughout the presentation by Andrew and Daryl. So we're only going to hit on a couple of quick ones here. Can you guys define the word repetition or repetitive in terms of how you used it in the presentation? Daryl is muted. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I can answer that. So repetition, I think a lot of times we think about it as, when people think of repetition, they think of repeated movements, something like working on an assembly line where you're doing the same thing over, numerous times a minute or days or hours. And that certainly could be considered a repetitive task. But I think a better way to think about repetition is repeated stress on a body segment without adequate time for recovery. So, you may be rotating between tasks and you may be moving something totally different, but if you're using your arms and picking it up and carrying it around, and you're using those body segments and muscles, tissues for extended periods of time, it should still be considered a repetitive task. I don't know if Daryl has anything to add to that.
Yeah, that's basically what I would have said. It's a lot of times I have read examples and definitions that are based more on the movements being repetitive. And if you're doing it more than half the time on your, within an hour, if you're doing it more than 30 minutes. But really, we should be thinking about, how much you're using it and if you're getting rest, because you could be doing different movements. You could be holding static postures that are all going to add up to needing more rest time. And are you using that muscle repetitively and enough that you're not getting the proper rest and you're getting symptoms later down the road?
Great answers, guys. Thank you. One more quick one so that we can keep in mind time here. Like I said, most of the questions were answered throughout the presentation. Do you guys have any tips for manual lifting of patients and stretchers, or patients within stretchers, I guess?
I do have, it is quite a bit of a big topic. Definitely understanding how dangerous it can be to lift anyone. There's recommendations that you need, more than 2 people for anyone that doesn't have full control of their body that's over 35 pounds is kind of the recommendation. So definitely using lifts and aids wherever possible. But I do have some presentations on that. If whoever wants to email me, I'll email them my presentation on that topic, which is shows a lot of different examples that you can use.
Perfect. Thank you, Daryl. And those of you that want to email Daryl or Andrew, their email addresses are right on the bottom left of their presentation right now, if you'd like to take a screenshot of that. One more reminder from Trevor to please access the survey and the Slido. That information is very important. Other than that, I'd like to thank Andrew and Daryl, and then Andre before them, for 2 very informative presentations.
And also, Dwayne, we want to remind people they haven't registered yet for next week's session to please go ahead and do so. Next week, we are looking at our topic being key topics in occupational ergonomics, with the first session being creating and fostering inclusive work environments to prevent MSDs amongst older workers. And then the second session will be a comparison of REBA and RULA tools. And so with that being said, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Again, have a happy Valentine's Day, and hopefully we'll get to see you all again next week. Thank you and take care.